We say it's a literal written document. But within there now, you've got one of the challenges now is to look at it and say, what kind of writing is this? And the next point right there, the genera means the kind, the sort, or the species. Is it literary form or figure of speech? Turn the page. On page 3 at the top, or page 42, number 3 at the top, there is a difference, and you know this, between reading a newspaper, a legal document, an elementary reading book, a restaurant menu, an owner's manual, a president's State of the Union address, and lyrics to a pop song. All of those are real forms of communicating with literature, through literature. But you cannot read, well, you shouldn't at least be able to read the President's State of the Union address as the lyrics of a pop song. They should be two different levels of communication, although they're both the same. If you read the President's speech like the lyrics of a pop song, you're probably going to miss the message. Or any of these things right here. If you're reading the restaurant menu, it's communicating. But if you're reading it like you read a newspaper, or you're reading it like you're reading some kind of a legal document, I'm sure restaurants have legal documents if you want to really get into it, but it's really not presented there on the menu. It's telling you what you can order. The legal information is somewhere else. And so the same thing is in the Bible. You can't read Psalms like it is necessarily a historical narrative. Or Psalms, or let's say Acts, like it's instruction, like when Paul is giving you a list in Ephesians 5. This is what you should do. This is how you should live. The book of Acts is a historical document telling you this is what happened. But later on, Paul then comes later and tells you what it means, and he teaches it. Here we go. 4 examples of this. Here are 4 examples. And these are 4 questions I'll challenge you with. Okay? Is the book of Jonah historical? Well, yes, we'll say the book of Jonah is historical. Go to the book of Jonah very quickly. But others would say, and here's the point, if the book of Jonah is historical, then you have to accept the fact that Jonah was swallowed by a big fish, a whale or whatever. You've got to go with that because it's what it says historically. Unless you're going to say, we don't believe in miracles and so we don't believe in the authenticity of this. But if you look, what's interesting here, there is an option out of this. There is one way of saying, I do not have to accept Jonah being swallowed by a whale as a literal historical fact. Now again, I'm using an example. I do not believe that. But here's the only way you can get out of this with hermeneutics. Is the book of Jonah a historical narrative with a poem in it, or is the whole book a poem? This is just an example. If the whole book's a poem, don't get bent out of shape about is it swallowed by a fish or not. But if it's historical, then you've got to say, yeah, he was swallowed by a fish, especially when Jesus comes later and says, as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the whale, or the fish, so I'll be in the heart of the earth for 3 days. Jesus, my friends, read this as historical with a poem. I'm just using it as an example. If it's poetry, you're free to move around. But if it's historical, it means what it says. Point B, the mustard seed, hyperbole. Hyperbole, it actually means an overshooting. And it's part of language. We use it all the time. There are lies in the English language. There are exaggerations in the English language. But there are hyperboles, things that you are overshooting for the sense. For example, I've got a couple written down in here. If you say, oh, that story is as old as time. Now, when you say that, nobody in the room really thinks this story is as old as time itself. That it came from the foundation of it. You just mean it's really, really old. Everybody's heard it. Or the next one. Everyone has heard what happened yesterday. Oh, everybody's heard that already. What, do you really mean that? Everyone has heard that? Or are you saying there's no sense, putting that on the news, everybody already knows that. There's no sense making the announcement, everybody already knows that. When maybe not everybody knows it. Hear what I'm saying? A hyperbole is part of speech. It doesn't mean everybody ever in the world has heard that. You're saying there's no sense telling the story. People pretty much know it already. Hyperboles are in the Bible. So when Jesus, now here's your question. Jesus says, for example, he says, take the mustard seed. It's the smallest of your garden seeds. Wait a minute. Not so. We have found smaller seeds than the mustard seed in Israel in use in the days of Jesus. Jesus was wrong. Right. If Jesus was trying to tell you, I am making a scientific statement, the mustard seed is the smallest seed that I ever created, then Jesus isn't God because there are other seeds that are smaller. But if Jesus was using a hyperbole, for example, the mustard seed, it's the smallest seed in your garden. And his point is not, yes, it's measured, it's smaller than it's look how small it is. And says if your faith is like this, if it's a seed, it can grow, is his point. Jesus would use hyperbole. Another place in the Gospels that uses Matthew, I think it's 9 verse 35, says Jesus was going into, quote, all the cities of Galilee. I mean, it's not that big of a place, but he didn't go to all of the cities. It seemed like he went. He was busy going to all the cities. But he didn't actually have to go to every little city or village to accomplish that. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a hyperbole. Now, if someone wants to be critical, they can, but then they're going to be critical all day tomorrow in the Des Moines Register and find all the different hyperboles in there and say, look at that, that's slander right there, that's a misquote. But they'd say, it's an expression, it's a form of speech. It is literally a hyperbole. That's literal. It's supposed to be like that. This is a huge thing in churches right now, and it's been that way for 100 years. Adam in the beginning, the Garden of Eden. What do we do with that? It's like, well, that's so hard to understand so long ago, and we're so secular and humanistic. We can't even believe that that's true. So Adam has to be a group of men or the first ape that made fire or something like this as he evolved, from the fish. But the thing is, when you read Genesis, let me read this. Adam is placed in a real geographical location, the Garden of Eden with 4 rivers, with real genealogy. I mean, it's got ages and genealogies coming right up to Noah. And if Adam, for example, is a group of men, at what time do they turn into individuals? Because Adam's genealogy leads right into Noah and Enoch, which leads right into Abraham and the 12 sons all the way up to Jesus. At what point is that genealogy mythical? I mean, you understand what I'm saying? I have a hard time. You can say, well, that was mythical and this is historical, but you can't, because now you're violating the rules of hermeneutics. It is a written document. It is authentic, and this is the genealogy. Yeah, but Adam couldn't live 930 years. Oh, why? Because it's a poem? Or because... No, because that's just too long. Well, if you're going to practice hermeneutics, you cannot do that. You say, they just can't believe it. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. You just can't believe it. But if you accept this as a historical document, and Genesis is written as a historical document, or if not, you're going to have to disagree with me and go back and say, well, now this is poetic. The snake is just an allegory, and Eve was just an allegory, and she represented this. And then you're going to give me a very clear sign at when did it really start to happen? Joseph and his coat of many colors? I mean, when Jacob goes to Egypt, when Moses talks to God on the Mount Sinai, when does it become historical? Or is it never historical? Which now you're really on some shaky ground, because Jesus looked at all of it, who is the Savior, and he talked about it all as historical. So just keep that in mind. And here's what we ended with last week, just referring to it. Which one of these is metaphors? For example, Jesus says, I am the door. Now this is important, because understand, I'm not bringing you answers necessarily. I'm just showing you where the battle's at. Hermeneutics. Jesus says, I am the door, which we know he's not a door. We don't have a special ritual in our churches where we all gather around a door and swing on hinges or something like this. We just know he said, I'm the door into the plan of God, or into this room of salvation. I'm the way to God. But he also said, this is my body. Well, was that also a metaphor? Or was he really holding that bread saying, this is going to become my body in transubstantiation, like the Catholic Church? Well, we're not Catholic, so it's like, no, that's not right. But if you're Lutheran, you believe in the real presence more than just being a figure of representation. Personally, just so you know, for the sake of discussion, I think it's a representation. This is my body. It represents. Do this, he says, in remembrance of me. The bread will bring you to remembrance of me. I was on the side of John Calvin. But look at this right here, the last paragraph of, page 43, the last little part right there at the top. 2 great reformers, Luther and Calvin, who talked about this, never could agree on the proper interpretation of this verse when it says, this is my body. Do you understand what we're doing here? I've got opinions, and I will argue my case, but I do realize that Martin Luther and John Calvin, 2 legends of church history who changed church history and sent us in the right direction, came together, and Luther says, it's a metaphor. Martin, it's a metaphor. He didn't mean that he's bread. And Luther would simply say, in his words, he'd say, all I know is he said, this is my body, and he took it as literal.